Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 to 34. Bible study script, KJV. Today we will meditate on Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 through 34 from the King James Bible. Let us enter this passage with reverence, seeking not only historical understanding, but also spiritual insight into the heart and will of God. Genesis 25 marks a significant transition in the story of the patriarchs. Abraham, the father of faith, is now reaching the end of his earthly journey. Yet even in his later years, God continues to fulfill his promises and advance his covenant plan through future generations. First, let us consider the opening verses, where Abraham marries Keturah and fathers additional sons. These sons become the ancestors of various tribes in the ancient Near East. However, the scripture clearly states that Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. This is not merely a matter of inheritance, but a confirmation of God's covenant promise. From a theological perspective, Isaac alone is the child of promise. Though Abraham loved all his children, God's covenant line would continue through Isaac. This reflects a consistent biblical principle. God's redemptive plan moves forward not by human tradition or natural order, but by divine selection and grace. From a Hebrew cultural viewpoint, inheritance typically went to the firstborn. Yet in this case, God overturns cultural expectations. Isaac, not Ishmael or the other sons, becomes the covenant heir. This reminds us that God's ways are higher than human customs. His purposes are guided by divine wisdom rather than human systems. As we move forward in the text, we see the death of Abraham. He dies at a good old age, full of years, and is gathered to his people. This phrase in Hebrew suggests more than physical burial. It reflects a spiritual reunion with those who have gone before, pointing to the ancient understanding of life beyond death, and the continuity of God's covenant people. Abraham is buried by both Isaac and Ishmael together. This moment is deeply symbolic. Though there had been separation and tension between them, they come together to honor their father. It is a brief yet meaningful picture of reconciliation and shared heritage. After Abraham's death, the narrative shifts to Isaac. God blesses Isaac, confirming that the covenant continues. We then encounter the genealogy of Ishmael. Though Ishmael is not the covenant heir, God still fulfills his promise to make him a great nation. This demonstrates God's faithfulness even outside the primary covenant line. God's mercy and provision extend broadly, yet his redemptive plan remains focused. Now we arrive at one of the most significant portions of this chapter, the birth of Esau and Jacob. Isaac and Rebekah struggle with barrenness for 20 years. Isaac prays to the Lord for his wife, and the Lord answers his prayer. This reveals a key spiritual truth. The continuation of God's promise depends on divine intervention, not human strength. Every generation of the covenant is born through God's grace. During Rebekah's pregnancy, she experiences intense struggle within her womb. She inquires of the Lord, and God reveals a prophetic word. 2 nations are within you, and the older shall serve the younger. This prophecy is extraordinary in the Hebrew context. Traditionally, the firstborn received the birthright and leadership. Yet God declares that the younger will prevail. This again demonstrates divine election. God's purposes are not limited by cultural expectations or human hierarchy. Esau is born first, red and hairy, a man of the field and a skilled hunter. Jacob follows, holding Esau's heel. His name, Yaakov in Hebrew, carries the sense of heel grabber or supplanter. Already, the narrative hints at future conflict and reversal. From a spiritual standpoint, Esau represents the natural man, driven by immediate desires and physical appetite. Jacob represents the spiritual pursuit of blessing and covenant, though his methods will later reveal human weakness and struggle. The closing verses of this chapter describe Esau selling his birthright to Jacob for a meal of bread and lentil stew. This moment is deeply symbolic. Esau, weary and hungry, despises his birthright and trades it for temporary satisfaction. The Hebrew text emphasizes that Esau despised his birthright. This was not merely a casual decision, but a profound spiritual failure. He valued immediate comfort over covenant blessing. The birthright represented spiritual leadership, inheritance, and participation in God's promise. By treating it lightly, Esau reveals a heart focused on the present rather than the eternal. Jacob, though flawed, recognizes the value of the birthright. He desires the blessing of God's covenant. Yet his pursuit also shows human imperfection. God's purposes will ultimately prevail, not because of Jacob's perfection, but because of God's sovereign grace. Theologically, this passage teaches us that God's promises move forward through divine election and grace. Human weakness and conflict cannot stop God's plan. Spiritually, it warns us not to exchange eternal blessings for temporary pleasures. Esau's choice serves as a powerful reminder to value what God values. From a broader biblical perspective, the story of Jacob and Esau foreshadows themes that run throughout Scripture: the reversal of expectations, the triumph of grace over human tradition, and the unfolding of God's redemptive plan, leading ultimately to Christ. As we reflect on Genesis 25, we see the faithfulness of God across generations. Abraham's life closes, but God's covenant continues. Isaac is blessed, Jacob is chosen, and the divine promise moves forward. For us today, the message is clear. We must cherish the spiritual inheritance God offers. We must seek His will beyond immediate desires. And we must trust that God's purposes are unfolding, even when human circumstances seem uncertain. May we learn to value eternal blessings over temporary satisfaction. May we trust in God's sovereign plan. And may we walk in faith as Abraham did, believing that God is always faithful to His promises. Thank you.